Hello and welcome to the very second episode of the BPMN Clinic. I'm Thomas, the developer advocate at Comunda, and I'm happy to be your host for today. And I brought a guest, which is the very famous Niall. Welcome to the stream. How are you doing?
I'm practically perfect in every way, although I feel that the intro music, has kind of set things up to be a more sort of jovial experience that people might
Oh,
actually be expecting. I do like that the tone is set now, but no, this is going to be people are in for. I assume they don't understand this yet, but a very miserable time where they have to endure an awful lot of very pedantic people looking at BPMN models.
that might be true. We have chosen a darker theme to get people set up, but I thought it might not be the worst idea to spread some joy in the beginning, and then we can go downwards the river from there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, why
Cool.
not? Why not like gaslight people who are
Yeah.
experiencing?
Awesome. So for today's session, and you might remember the last time we've met 3 months ago, we are also drinking beer. So this kind of habit is going to continue in today's session. And I did brought a smoke beer from Bamberg, which is famously known for creating these types of beers. And I also made some notes about what's actually smoke beer, and it's specific to Germany, so it's in Germany called Rauchbier. And the beer I brought is very known for its distinct smoke flavor because they use melted barley dried over an open flame. So that's what I can tell you. And the city of Bamberg, which I visited on Monday because there was a public holiday in Bavaria, or only in Augsburg, which is even better. I visited Bamberg and they do have 9 different breweries. So I got this one. It looks quite nice, and I will be tasting it live on camera very, very soon. So, Niall, what do you got?
So my trips, because I did not have a day off. People who know German holidays know that Bavaria has the most public holidays, and I live in Berlin, where it has the least. But I did bring a beer from the adventure that I had on my day, which was I went to the office, and the office here in Berlin has Comunda beer. This is arguably better. Did you just ruin your beer there, Thomas? This is
Oh,
arguably
yeah,
better
sorry.
because it's free and it's also nearby. So let me just there we go. And I also obviously drink out of a glass because you know, I'm very particular. This is a beer that we brewed about a year ago, maybe. So the beer is still just about good, and it is called a Long Running Zebra. We even have our own little marketing to do the lovely branding on this, which is quite cute. Um, yeah, for anyone who's going to CommundaCon in October, you probably find a whole bunch of that stuff there. So one of the wonderful things to enjoy. So yeah, cheers, Thomas, to
Yeah, cheers.
a
Apparently,
tradition that
you've seen
maybe
me messing
is a
things
little
up, so
problematic.
I already needed to taste, but cheers. Mhm. And what I tasted is really smoky. So if you come to Berlin and are not from Germany, I can just advise you to try get something like this in Germany if you're there and if you have the chance. So yeah, cool. Shall we begin with
Let's do
actual
it.
BPMN fun? That's why the
Well,
people
yeah,
are
we
here.
should also probably explain just very quickly to people who haven't what we're doing here.
Um,
So over the
sure.
last little while, people have submitted models, or we found models in the forum that they have questions about. Um, and we have decided we've got a whole bunch of them. And these are BPM models made in business process model and notation, and they're wrong. Uh, Now, some are very wrong. Like fundamentally, you shouldn't ever connect those symbols up, which is fine. But some are just sort of not best practice, which is actually more complicated but more frequent. And myself and Thomas are going to look at some of these weird models that were sent to us and discuss. Maybe kind of ignore how bad they are, but to ask the questions. Hey, what was the creator of this model trying to achieve? And why doesn't it exactly work that way, and how can we make it work? So we're all about solutions here. Thomas has picked 2 models, I have picked 2 models. We haven't actually spent time looking at each other's models, So we'll be discussing them as we go along. So it'll be a fun surprise for anybody, for both of us and everyone viewing as well. So I'm just preparing my models there. So
Yep.
we're going to kick it off with you, Thomas, right? So what do you got first?
Yeah, I'm kicking things off, so let me share my screen. So right here you can see my first model, but before getting into the nitty-gritty, I can pronounce it, into the details of this model, if you have any models you want to share and you want to get help on, feel free to share them to either way directly to us, if you are following us over social media, or send them to community@comuna.com, right? That's the mail address.
Correct.
It is.
Correct.
Awesome. Having said so, it's time to focus on the BPMN model. So we got this fancy one right here. And for now, let's try to figure out what the user or the designer of the model wanted to actually achieve. So in the beginning, there was a picture of this model, so I already translated it to BPMN into my modeler to really edit it. And of course, token simulation usually always helps. The problem, though, is that when I do activate token simulation in this certain diagram, I can't trigger the actual simulation. So we
no
do
start
have
event.
no, there's no start event. We do have two subprocesses here, and these subprocesses are not even connected somehow, and we cannot trigger the process. And we will, of course, change this very soon. But before adding or editing anything, let's quickly take a look on the process captured in here as well to really understand what the person wanted to do here. So after having completed this start event within the subprocess, we do have this XOR gateway. Per default, the task is not completed. And then we do have some user task, which we, I think, are going to focus on. And this user task can either be completed, but it's not sure what's going to happen afterwards, or there can be an event that modified the context of the user task. So some kind of message coming in, and we need to overhaul the user task, maybe. And then, once again, the message coming in, we check in a non-interrupting fashion, which is even more interesting to consider because we are creating a new token. So one token stays here live. We are creating a new token, which is then going down to this exclusive gateway, which once again checks whether the task is complete. But of course, the task cannot be complete if there's a token coming down that way, or most likely not. And then either per default, the task is not complete and we are just going to end this process, or the task has been completed and we are going to complete some other task within seventh task. And this whole subprocess is then embedded into this kind of structure. We do have a loop, or this should visualize a loop, I think. So whenever there's an event coming in that modifies a certain type of context, we want to rerun this whole thing. So I guess I do have now more questions than I've started with. But that's basically the current modeling as they have described here. And they also, or in the picture we used, there was also this kind of ideal modeling, which is very ideal because we only have a service task and nothing else. So maybe let's just ignore this modeling thing down here. We can remove this. I think we'll never get to such an ideal solution. And we can start off with actually creating a proper start event for our process in general. And of course, as you might know from the last time, I do like pools. So we just create a pool around it to, have a scope for process. How shall we name those? It's the process described in here is so abstract, don't even have a name.
I think, I would go with like reusable task, right? Or something like that, because while it is also a very generic model, I feel that the person who modeled this is trying to create a generic pattern that clearly arrives more than once. That's my theory. A very important thing about looking at models is coming up with theories about what we think they're trying to do, right? And bits of this make me think that this is a common pattern that they want to implement multiple times, which is why whenever you showed, when the bit you deleted, the bit that said um, the model
Yeah,
they
yeah,
want
yeah,
to
yeah.
see, that actually I think is relevant, because what I think what they're trying to say
Oh,
is they want to move the complexity away from having to reproduce this the whole time to having a single task. And they can probably do that with a what's it called, a call activity,
yeah,
if they
exactly.
model this sort of once really well. So yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a
So
lot going on here.
it is
We're
in general when you, like you have already mentioned it. Typically, you would embed this kind of in core activity. So for the new process or for the re-engineered one, we actually don't need this kind of sub-process anymore. That's my hypothesis. Because for the loop, it's not necessarily
I would agree with you.
a thing which
Yeah,
is
I
needed.
think we should keep it, because that event coming in to modify the context is probably, if we go by scope, right? We want to get rid of the sub process, right? So to get rid of the sub process, we first have to implement that thing that they want, right? So they clearly have this concept that an external service is updating something that means the process instance needs to be given new data.
Yeah,
In
exactly.
this case, it doesn't work that way at all, because there's never a token waiting at that message event. So that wouldn't work. But the pattern is pretty common. There's a couple of ways of doing it.
Exactly. So
Which
my take on
which one
this,
to go for?
is always the event-based sub-process. Coming in a message event, we want to, for instance, overhaul the data in our process. So doing so, we can simply add a new sub-process in here. We can call it an event sub-process, and we call this event sub-process context change. And if the context has changed, we are simply either, maybe for the beginning, let's make it easy, we are going to execute some scripts which modify the data, which modify properties within our process instance for the time being. Maybe we can add some more complexity afterwards into here. Or what do you think about it?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think there's a scenario where people like the idea of, so when you start a process instance, it usually has a payload of data that the process is working on, right? And it's a really common scenario to say, oh, my external systems of data has been updated, and I need to now give this process instance new context for what it's working on.
Yeah.
Because, like we both know, a very important rule around BPMN is not to treat the data here as a single source of truth. The BPMN model is the source of truth specifically for state, but not for data, because your data objects are always maintained in a proper database,
Yeah.
which means I've seen before a pattern where you just send in a message with a payload of data that overrides the existing data, for instance. And for that, you wouldn't actually need a script, because the act of receiving the message already updates the data technically.
Oh yeah, that's true.
But
That's true.
I think that's not always clear. So if you want it to be very clear in the BPMN model, you could have like a manual task or an annotation that says on the event the data would be updated from the payload, because I
Okay.
always need to remember things that are not always clear in BPMN. Yeah,
Let's just move it this way. And as you said, we can always use a comment
yeah, exactly.
saying, "Hey, message payload updates the updates the data, updates the process instance data." That should be expressive enough, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's pretty good. There's one more change to make though, and it's to do with the fact that if a message comes in, the process instance will end.
Yep.
There we go.
I
Yeah,
noticed this.
because that'd be kind of funny if like any data changes and you immediately just cancel your process instance by sending an update
Why
to them.
not?
Yeah, sure, why not? Yeah, the data's changed, and that actually, you know what? You're right. That actually could be an issue. I think it's a legitimate thing to say. Hey, the process data has changed. This instance is no longer valid.
Hmm.
We could interrupt it. And the only reason I
Exactly.
don't think it's the case here is because of this weird arrow thing you have in the original thing that goes back into the
Yeah.
process. That kind of indicates that it doesn't want to stop stuff, it just wants to somehow feed it back in.
Hmm.
So I think we can now remove that, I guess, because I think you've already modeled a
No,
pretty good
that's
example.
completely true. But what would you think, or what would you do if someone now asks, "Hey, if I'm now actually in the moment the message is being received, I'm working on the user task, so there might be an inconsistency of data. So we still have this problem of inconsistency. So
Mm.
how is there a possibility to handle this without aborting the whole execution?"
I mean, there is, but it's dumb. So what you can do is, so we have a call activity there, right?
Yeah,
So we could actually implement this in a very similar way to the way they did, which is put a boundary event on the sub process that interrupts it when a
yeah,
message comes in, and then just goes right back into it. So what that would do is it would kill the original task to make sure that they can't complete it with that data, but it would then immediately recreate that task for the user with the new data.
yeah.
So that would work, but it's a bad user experience, honestly,
It is.
to be working on something and then suddenly the task disappears and then a couple of seconds later reappears with changed data.
Mhm.
But it would definitely fix the problem. It would definitely allow us
Yeah,
to do
agreed.
that.
I won't do the change now, but in general, yes, you're right. So using a call activity which embeds all of this, and whenever the context changes, you would abort the execution of this call activity and recreate a new instance of the call activity. So that's the solution to sum it up again. Awesome. So having figured this out, let's take a look on how we can clean up this. So a thing which really triggers me. Maybe first of all, let's just move it out here. I don't want this to be in here anymore. So we don't need this again. Let's remove this as well. Now it already should be executable. We don't need this comment anymore. The thing which really bothers me is to have an end event here in the middle of this process. So ooh, that's hard because usually there's this best practice that you always should
Mm,
model from the left to the right,
mm,
and there are good reasons for us to follow this, especially if you are used to reading from the left to the right and not from the right to the left or something like some other reading strategies. Might be different in other civilizations, but for us, yeah, that might be a bit weird. So also, no, this completely freaks me out. Do you think we do actually need this exclusive gateway? Because I
So
certainly don't think so.
that's a great question. And in fact, when you were talking about the thing that really irritated you about this model, the gateway, something that always irritates me is a XOR gateway right after a start event. I'll tell you, especially one that goes to an end event, because you shouldn't. So that's allowing a user to start a process that may immediately end, which means they shouldn't be starting it. So, like, you shouldn't be allowed start a process that then reaches a gateway and then immediately
Yeah,
dies. There should be a better construction like that. But actually, in
and
this case,
just
it's
to
really confusing what they're trying to actually do. So the
it
task, so
is,
start the process. Task
yeah,
is complete. Is the question they have, right? Oh, we have a
exactly.
toast image again.
Yeah,
Now,
oh, stop! I wanted you to stop. Nah, damn it.
so if the task is not complete, we then go and do a task. If the task is complete,
But the task can never be complete.
yeah. So
The task always will be
yeah.
incomplete.
So I'm really interested in what they were trying to do. If anyone is actually watching this on Twitch and has any idea, please put it in the comments.
Yeah, please
What
do so.
sort of use case do you think they were going for here with this concept? I mean, I'm trying to think of an example of like, there's one example where a user like they want to limit the number of tasks that exist because the system can only handle so many, like an external system can only handle so many requests, right? And in that case, maybe you might want to limit the number of instances you start or the tasks you start. But it doesn't seem the case here. What do you think?
I don't think this is like a proper reason to do it that way. Because have you seen a situation where the user had too many tasks to work on in Camunda?
Not for user tasks, but like let's
Yeah.
imagine you have a service task.
For service tasks, that's completely the case.
Yeah.
But for user tasks, really, I don't see this.
No. Well, if they reflect the user tasks of an existing system, maybe. Can we actually just? There's one thing I'd like to do. Could you just connect the some task to the end event, just so I
Yep.
don't go insane? Thank you.
Yep. You're welcome.
And now you know
Just
what? I think let's skip some logic for a second, and I'm going to let you just clean this model up. Let's just ignore the. Let's just try and do exactly keep the functionality, but just actually model it in a more best practice way. So when I look at it, I don't get upset.
to just quickly interrupt you, because from the chat in Twitch, Ahmed has or can see and vision one case why this gateway is actually useful. And he mentioned if this we are taking a look at is a sub-process and there's a parent process, we want to check maybe if the parent process has executed a task, and if that task from the parent process is executed, we want to move to yes.
Okay, so in that case, we're just missing a service task in the beginning that then checks whether that task is still running.
Maybe.
Because we wouldn't really know.
I just need to check on the
you
chat
do that.
once again. And when the subprocess is triggered, they just double check that the task is really completed. Or maybe I've got you wrong, Ahmed, in what I've just said, based on what you just wrote. So just to read it completely to you.
I can read it actually on the right there.
Oh, you can see it. Oh, that's superb.
New feature that I didn't know existed actually.
No, that's good. Then I don't need to read it step by step to you. So it might be like what I've described to you, or another reason could be just to really double check things. To really make sure that it's completed.
Yeah, let's make an assumption just to get the model finished. So let's actually, I think Ahmed's suggestion is pretty good. So I think we should go with that. I think we should assume that this is a double check. And so if so, then the gateway can say the same. Yep. But the everything after the gateway and the boundary event then needs to be fixed.
Yeah, that's true. The boundary event for sure needs to be fixed, definitely. So having this kind of boundary event, why do we need actually? We can. For what do we need this boundary event? Because we have got this start, or we have got this
some event that modified the context.
Yeah, but the context is also being modified by the one we catch in the.
Yeah, true. I think it might even be. Yeah, you know what? Let's delete it. We take care of that already. It doesn't interrupt the task, so it's clear they don't want to interrupt it.
Yeah.
I don't think that's necessary. You know what? I actually think that they're right. That if they just have this event subprocess, they could have what their original model is, which is just a start event and a user task. Maybe the gateway is useful for the reasons Ahmed brought up, but I think
the rest can be deleted.
I think we can remove the rest. I think we have it implemented because we have the event subprocess. With that gateway, that event doesn't make sense.
Yep. But and then still, I guess there is this. Yeah.
No idea.
Going back, so if the event So I think they want to be, or they want to make some kind of rollback or compensation by doing so,
Well, you know
because
what?
if the
They might
task has been
actually,
completed, then
yeah,
they move
maybe they're
years.
talking to an external system, right?
Yeah, it could
So
be.
if we kill the message event again, and we kill the end event, and we just connect some task directly to complete some connect some task to complete some task, and then have an end event, that should do the trick, I think. Because then once the task is complete, they will tell this external system the task has been complete, right?
Wait.
So
Now
here's my
my brain.
assumption: some task is a thing that needs to be done.
Yeah.
Complete some task is actually telling the external system the task has been done, right? Which means, because if you look at the
Oh, I
gateway,
gotcha.
it
So,
only
so
goes up there if
yeah,
the task is complete.
yeah, yeah,
So if we
yeah, yeah,
delete the second gateway and delete all that stuff and just connect it all to the,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I got what you meant.
that
Okay,
should actually do the trick, I
then I
think. Yeah.
thought what was too complex. Cool.
Hey, that was it. Once again, we have
I
solved the problem by just deleting symbols.
Yes, we did. Just for me to have it cleaned up a bit more.
Oh, good. I'm glad you're doing that.
Yeah, but that's fine now.
Well, you can delete the boundary event. That's that horrible little message
Oh,
boundary
sorry,
event.
I forgot about it.
Yeah.
Awesome. So that's the solution for the first problem, and
Yeah, I like it. It's quite clean now, actually, all of a sudden.
yeah, it is. Thanks, Ahmed, for your help. That's good. Engage with us. I'm trying to monitor the chat, even though this kind of
I think it'd be
leads to
easier
a
with
brain
during
overflow.
one of my models, I think, Thomas, to
Yeah,
be able to read the chat as well.
yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's check. We are going to go over to your screen share. We can already
Yes, you
see
are.
your model. That's perfect.
So here we are. So I'm going to do the same thing that Thomas did, which is just talk a little bit about what we see before we actually change any of it. Um, so we have, luckily, already better than Thomas's example because we have a start event. Pretty cool. We also have a service, a thing that makes kind of sense, which is an error event. So what we expect to happen here is not going to work in tug simulation because it just crashed. Amazing. Look at that. So I'm going to look at me go. I think I need to
Oh
restart
no.
the
Oh no.
modeler.
Yep, then I'm going back
Do
into
that.
interview mode while you're sharing
See,
very.
this is yeah, this is great because I get to there's us making fun of really bad models and the whole and then look at this, we actually what's
Oh,
happening? Yeah, there's
let
loads
me
of
know if your
Windows
laptop
beeps.
crashes.
No, it should be my laptop won't crash. I'm pretty sure it'll just be the modeler. But I do love the Windows beeps that I get to enjoy. That unfortunately you never get to hear
No,
and
no,
have fun
luckily
with.
not.
Yeah.
And I get chills by hearing those beeps. I know I do want something, but it's keeping. I know it doesn't work, but it keeps giving me this tone, and
I think the worst is when it makes the same tone when you have a meeting invite in Outlook,
oh
right?
yeah,
And you open it, and then you just try to close it. It for some reason asks you every time, "Do you want to save what just
exactly.
happened?" Like, no, I didn't even change it, and I don't. It's a meeting that happened last week. Why would I possibly want to change anything? Anyway, so
Yep.
this is Niles complaining about Windows. So let me see if I can find that model again.
Okay.
Um,
Let me know
this
if
serves you
you're
right for
when you're
being
ready.
one minor version off the the version we're supposed to be. Okay, let's see. Okay, I should be able to share again. You can change
Okay.
it back.
Then I'm going over to your share. Here you go.
Marvin. Okay, here we are in all our glory. Let's not click on tug simulation in case something breaks. So we have a start event. We have a task. We then have a task that has a single exit, which is here. The task also has an error boundary event, which is business error that gets thrown by this user task, and it says fail task. Now, this is already quite advanced. We already have an event subprocess that is triggered by a non-interrupting message event. Great. So when this task comes in, it throws an error called fail task. Okay. This actually looks really simple and looks like it probably works. And before I change anything, I want to talk about something that struck me when I first saw the event, which is this is called fail task and this is called fail task,
Oh, yeah.
right? So Here's my theory, okay, about what the person who built this model wanted to achieve. They wanted to have a situation where while doing this task, a new message can come in, throw an error that triggers this to interrupt the task, right? Because um, this message event is non-interrupting, right? So that means that this can come in many times, and if it does, it's fine. But this is an error event, which once the token arrives here, it will actually interrupt the process, right? So if we can assume that the user wanted this to trigger this, the weird thing is this kind of works. Like it would work in a way that would make them think they've done it correctly, right? But it actually doesn't work at all the way they think. So let me explain.
Great.
If the goal here is to interrupt the task when this message comes in, that's exactly what's going to happen. But it's not because this error event is catching the one that's thrown here. Because of the way error events in BPMN work, they're thrown up scope, right? So the error event will actually never be caught by this because it's on a lower scope, right? So this could only be caught by an error event thrown inside this task, right? So in this case, a message comes in, it throws an error. The error event goes to the next scope, which is the process instance, or if there's a parent process. And if there's nothing to catch it, it ends the process. Okay. So it'll still interrupt this task. The problem is, let's imagine that we have a second task here, right? Which doesn't have a boundary event. The problem is this now cancels everything. So even if we're at this point, the token is here, throwing this error event will actually also cancel this, right? And by the existence of this boundary event, I feel they actually want to have a message come in that triggers an event that somehow cancels this task. Just the fact it's a non-interrupting event to me makes me think that they actually don't want to interrupt the process because they expect other tasks to exist. So yeah, that's where I stand on this model. What are your thoughts, Thomas?
I totally agree with you. The first time I also thought that like you do have fail task twice labeled the same, and I assumed that they want to cancel do task A by simply capturing the message in the event-based subprocess and then failing it, but it doesn't solve the problem they are having. So I think it's quite easily solvable, right? You would just catch, for instance, the message in task A and
Yep.
end the process. Or
Yeah, there 100%. There's a
no,
few
not
ways of
even end
solving
the
it.
process, maybe.
Yeah, so let's solve this the first way, the way you suggested, which is actually a pretty good one, where we actually have a interrupting message event that's just here, and we delete this and even this. That actually skips a lot of steps, and that basically solves it. Um, so that's basically how to do it.
Yeah.
I can think of other solutions. Like let's imagine we have something like we have this error event. Let's say, let's imagine that we have a scenario where we also have this one here, a failed task as well. So this would be kind of interesting, right? Where we have a scenario where we actually it could happen in one of two tasks, but definitely not this one.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a cool like scenario because in this case it still wouldn't work, but we would need to think of a different way of doing it. Maybe I have two message events, but it's a little bit repetitive. Um, and if you did it in parallel, it wouldn't work. So I think for this, conditional event would work. This would just be an end event.
Yep.
And this would like new message arrives, and this would be like set a cancel variable. So this would basically then say, okay, if we if we get this message in, we set this variable to cancel the task, and then we end. The benefit of this would actually be if this message comes in while we're here, then if we arrive here, it'll automatically cancel the task and go here. Because once you set the variable, it doesn't need to be on this task to cancel it. It could actually be here, the message comes in, then after this task is completed, it arrives at C, and as soon as it does, it evaluates this and says, oh, the variable is cancelled, got to go here. So that's a fun pattern, but I actually think that's just me trying to make it more complicated. I think the original suggestion that you made makes complete sense.
But your thoughts are valid. I think it's interesting.
This does the trick. Yeah, really simple. Which is a shame because I really hate removing event subprocesses because I think they're my favorite symbol. But,
they bring up so much more possibilities. That's true. And the thing which I really notice when watching new people model BPMN for the first times, they tend to make everything way too complicated than it should or than it has to be. Adding more complexity, which can be done easy, like overthinking all these kind of things and just adding too much, which we have also seen in the first example. So yeah, pretty cool.
Cool. So what have we got? What's your next model?
My next model is actually about, or originates from Camunda, kind of.
Yeah.
So we have this very, very complex BPMN. And our task it is to try and reduce the complexity and find some kind of smells, let's put it this way. And I have got the BPMN linting off right away because when I activate it, there are a lot of things which are not perfectly right. So let's try and use token simulation here, right? So we can trigger our token right here. We go to conference. In general, like this can be used for you to go on a conference, for instance, KubeCon or Devox. And when you go there, you first of all get coffee, then you decide whether you want to visit a booth or attend a talk, and so on and so forth. Like this path clearly shows that you go visit a booth, you choose to go for a booth with some free stuff, and you get so much swag that you cannot carry anymore. There is kind of an escalation path, so we do have an escalation boundary event here, and this basically tells you, hey, the swag is terrible, let's grab another coffee. So you end up in the first activity once again. Going further through the model, let's change a few things, because of course at Devox you want to learn stuff about Java. You go down to attend a talk, and luckily it was not boring, so you've learned things and no need to learn more. Based on a very untransparent decision, you could also choose to get another coffee, and that you are not yet done with the conference. And also, as said, if the talk is not boring, we do have this error event here. You would go and visit another booth. Even more interesting now is to take a look on this path where we actually visit the Camunda booth. Starting process instance will be going down right here. You'll find us, your people there, and there we do have a parallel gateway where the process... Oh, this is going to be interesting now.
It's an infinite loop.
It's an infinite loop, yeah. And right here, you split up the gateway, so you talk to awesome people and get cooler than you were before, and then it repeats itself forever, more or less. Yeah, so here we are. That's the process we want to talk about, and I think it's quite complex, and there are a few things missing from a BPMN perspective, and especially if you ask me, who's very much into getting the style best practices right. So first of all, of course, a start event, that's perfectly fine, but of course, what is missing? It's a pool.
Ugh. I don't know why you add pools. Just this.
I love them. I usually, whenever I model I I often end up having multiple pools just to also show the environment of the process. Not only showing like with a pool, you can say that's my scope of the process, and with
Mm.
other maybe collapsed pool, you can show some nice dependencies to other black box systems,
Mm.
organizations, so on and so forth. Um, and it might come from university that this was burned into my head, and
Yeah,
I
I was
just
actually
cannot
about to say,
resist anymore.
I think I knew where it came from. It was
Yeah,
just because you were told so frequently. I, I don't mind pools actually as a general concept. I really don't like using them for technical models so much. I, because I think they're kind of superfluous if you're building a technical
mm,
model. But I kind of agree with you. Actually, it can actually really help to define external resources and be able to discuss more.
but
But
my assumption
uh,
there, since you've brought this whole topic up,
yeah,
um,
bring it.
you never
I think,
only model for technical purposes, or this kind of use case is rather occurring not that often.
well,
You would also
let me
try
put it
to
this
have
way.
this other benefit of it, to have some piece of documentation, something
Mm,
top level management can also relate to, or the business analyst can relate to. So it should be readable by other people. And of course, not everything in there is purely needed for automation purposes. And especially if you have multiple hierarchies of BPMN diagrams, you can have a pure technical one in the lowest sphere. Um,
mm.
but nevertheless, in the upper ones, this kind of context is sometimes very important.
I actually think that I like when I'm building complex models. I feel a pool adds additional context that may complicate people's understanding of the model.
Hmm.
So if you imagine that, well, I do agree that for design models, it's sometimes important to get an overview. The reason somebody looks at a technical model in most cases that's already deployed, let's say,
Yeah,
is to very quickly understand what's going on and to be able to fix whatever problem is happening or to decide on what's happened. And I
agreed.
find that if you have lots of these message flows and external processes, it just confuses the palette, the thing to the point where unless you already know a lot about the execution of BPMN, where those message flows aren't executable, so they actually don't mean anything, it could end up confusing somebody to think, oh, maybe that flow is broken or whatever, when that flow
Yeah,
doesn't actually exist.
yeah.
But that's a yeah, that's just my experience
No,
from
I see where you're coming from, and for sure this is valid. Agree.
Ahmed just triggered me with a comment about
Swim lanes.
swim lanes, which I mean, if there's one thing I hate more than pools, it's
Uh,
swim lanes. And again, it's for exactly the same reason. I think they're totally valid for diagrammatic purposes, but I feel that they just make the model harder to read
yeah,
in cases of building for execution, because one of the things that you can consider, what do swim lanes do? They separate your tasks into responsibilities, and the key thing about one of the key best practices with modeling is go left to right, have a happy path that has all the tasks you want in a big row. As soon as you enter a swim lane, that happy path is going to just do this
yeah,
all over the
yeah,
place,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it just immediately becomes harder to read. Not that it's invalid, because who is in charge of certain tasks is valid information to convey to users.
Mm,
Totally agree. But I think it's more useful information, and it's more often the information someone's looking for documentation purposes and not for execution
yeah.
purposes.
And
Again,
even
that's
though
my opinion. So
no, no, I totally agree with you. I don't like swim lanes either because usually, or there must be a very good reason to use them. For instance, if you model some kind of process and at a certain step you need some approval from another party, you have this one task, one activity you would model in another swim lane, and this other swim lane adds so much more complexity from a viewing point of view, and also not only complexity but also more space. And I want to have my diagrams rather small so I can take a look on them and see everything right away. Yeah,
So
It's
our,
difficult.
our controversial, we finally agree on something, Thomas. Well, we
Yeah.
agree that we disagree with Ahmed. um, so sorry for that. But let's focus on this diagram again. Let's
Yeah,
decide
please.
not to add lanes to
Um,
it. You can have a pool then.
so I only want a pool, no lanes, as you said. I have already named the pool, and first of all, we get a coffee. Um, that's nothing wrong to do. It's a manual task. Also, a thing which freaks me out in here is that there has been one activity which is labeled as a manual task, but none of the other ones. Um, According to BPMN style guides, this should be changed. And of course, get a coffee as well, and then we have a decision. And on what should this decision be based on? Like, why?
Yeah, this so sometimes gateways can get away with not needing. I think can get away with the idea of not needing a label. If it was very obvious, like if that first task said decide on book to read, and one said and one was like read book, and the other one was like burn book or something, right? You can kind of infer that.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
should always label them, always, but you can sometimes guess. This, on the other hand, it is a complete mystery which
agreed.
one you should go with based on coffee.
And
So based on coffee,
usually,
do you go to a talk?
yeah,
Definitely. Do you go
yeah.
to a booth with coffee? It's not clear. So this needs to be labeled for sure.
A thing how you could improve this, and which is always my recommendation, is to have at least one service task in front of the gateway which somehow relates to this. If you have the possibility to do so, it's not always possible, but here we could, for instance, say now, check the conference schedule. And if there's something good in there, we have a data point to build up on to make
Mm,
this decision. Because otherwise, taking a look on the process, what's the criteria or where do we make our mind up about the data we want to make a decision on in the data driven exclusive gateway, right?
yeah.
Um, so, yeah, check the conference schedule. It's once again a it can be a user task. You can pull up your phone, have the conference derived into common task list, and from there on, then make a decision. And the decision would be, is it talk? Let's make it easy, and it's either yes or no.
I'm going to be slightly pedantic and say that if our happy path is visit the booth, then the gateway should probably be labeled in a more affirmative. It's the most pedantic thing I think I've ever said in my life, because it really doesn't matter. But generally speaking, we're doing a very unique thing here, which is editing an existing model. Usually, when you're building a model from scratch, you build your happy path first. And usually, what you want is the gateways to affirm the happy path. So the yes route or the more obvious route, generally speaking, if you can, as Thomas said, it's not always possible to do all best practices, but it's
Yeah, but
sometimes.
that's totally true. And I tend to forget about this one specifically because when creating a new model, I tend to follow it right away. But in
Mm,
models you review, it's like, oh no, I don't want to now reorganize everything in here.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So of course you go then visit a booth. That's a manual task. You choose which one, and once again, of course, the happy path would be to go to the Commando booth, right? Um,
I mean, that's usually where I am. So,
yeah. So then it should be further down, right?
so if it says, so yeah, so there's a lot of things here that we can change. I think we should focus because there's quite a lot wrong with this. We should probably focus on
Yeah.
the really big glaring things. So do you want to pick something there in the next little section that you think is a very glaring best practice issue that annoys you personally?
Personally, I'm pretty much annoyed by the boundary event.
Oh yeah, okay. Tell me about that.
Um, I don't know on. Oh, I don't know why I escalate anything. at this point in time. And also, when taking a look on the error event we got down here, it's basically you attend a talk and it's boring. And I assume you get free stuff, but there's nothing in there. So context wise, it should be the same, right? But it's not. It's marked differently. And first of all, a label is missing. Question would be if an exclusive gateway would also be valid. And otherwise, I would rather choose a conditional boundary event than an actual escalation event.
Yep, that's not bad. Yeah, I think there's it's hard to know exactly what is triggering that, which makes it kind of hard to choose which kind of event to go with. But yeah, that seems fine.
Yeah. Is there anything triggering you in this model,
I mean, where to start?
particularly?
The parallel gateway kind of confuses me.
Oh yeah.
I don't think it's not wrong exactly, right? It's not correct either, right? Because functionally speaking, it's I don't know why we decided on a modeling perspective on find your people to suddenly just go down rather than go across, which is so the first thing is just on placement of symbols. And people don't tend to understand the value of how easier it is to understand a model if you just place the symbols one after another. So actually, if you want to just move that sort of just right afterwards, it will just to people watching this, it'll suddenly become much more obvious what is happening because your brain doesn't need to suddenly be jarred by an idea that now what I've always called snaking models that just decide to just go sort of like this around the model. They make your brain do unnecessary work to figure out what's happening next. So yeah, thanks Thomas for doing the hard work of actually doing that. Yeah. So if we sort of tinker that a little bit and just have everything go left to right and nothing up to down, I think the rule that I usually think of whenever I think of where you enter and exit a task is if the task is so enter from the left and leave from the right, but also you should only be going into the top or bottom of a task for loops backwards. Or so for instance, you'll see on the get coffee, usually you would have a gateway in there to merge it, but this is actually fine. I think it's still understandable because you can still read the whole happy path and just kind of ignore anything coming in from the top or the bottom if you know that those are really just going to be loops that you don't need to care about just yet. So I think even moving the parallel gateway up, I think already
Yeah.
gives a much easier readability to the model. So that was the one thing that was kind of irking me a little bit. And the problem is it's not wrong necessarily. So, but it's just, I don't know, just it just made it seem more complicated than necessary.
There is a very good question from Thales, though, coming just in while you were talking about these things. What if there aren't awesome people? Niall, what's happening then?
Yeah, that we actually should add an event sub process to this to immediately just terminate the process as soon as no awesome people are detected. So no running it at all.
Oh, and it is mandatory to execute that task of meet or of talking to us. There's no going
Well,
back. Once you showed up there,
that's
Niall
true.
is coming and
A lot of people say that they don't talk to me, that I talk at them. So, Tal, you cannot escape. No running can escape my voice. My voice travels faster than anyone can run. So, you can try, but you won't get away.
yeah,
I
that's
think that
fun.
I think that the process is a lot more improved just by moving symbols around, which is
Yeah.
quite interesting. Because in the previous examples, we removed a bunch of complexity to make a model easier, but in this one, we actually just changed the order of things, and it's immediately more readable. And that's a very undervalued way of manipulating models.
Agreed.
I would suggest to people that if you have a model that you built, especially the first time you built it, just go back and first try to rearrange them in a more like best practice scenario, and you probably might end up with just an easier model to follow, like this, like you just showed, Thomas.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought it would it is worth sharing that even though the model might be syntactically correct, there are things you still can improve and should improve over the iterations in BPM, more or less. Yeah. Oh, the finite loop due to the parallel gateway.
So
Usually it would
that's a
stop
great one.
itself
Yeah.
because, or taking a look domain wise, especially now since you check the conference schedule and based on this have a choice to decide for a thing, you can always decide differently in a loop. Apparently, the token simulation is not that intelligent. Say if I move here again.
Well, you can select the
Yep.
gateway. Yeah, that will
Ah,
change
oh,
the
damn it,
gateway.
I have chosen the wrong one. But let's imagine the token would have flown down here. I could have checked the gateway to just visualize to
Yeah.
break the infinite loop. So it would have solved itself eventually at some point in time.
Mm.
But of course, to be honest with you, you would stop multiple times by the Camunda booth in terms or in the time of a conference, for sure.
Of course, we have a great booth. Yeah, there's lots of them
Awesome.
are.
So, Niall, you have one last model, and we
I
are
sure
already
do.
almost
We got like
at the
four
time.
minutes, so let's hope it's an easy one to talk about. It's got one of my favorite things, compensation. It's got one of my second favorite thing, compensation done by someone who doesn't understand compensation exactly, because it is by far the most complicated symbol in BPMN is compensation. So this one's really interesting for a few reasons. Let's once again talk through what's actually happening here. So we have a start event. We have some service task that runs. We have a compensation event which won't be triggered because you compensation events are the only boundary events in BPMN that do not trigger while a task is active. It only triggers after a task has been activated and finished specifically. So it's the only event that does that. So that means that we go here, we run this, we run here, we run here. This is where things get weird. And then we have an implicit parallel that inexplicably goes to the end event. Not sure why. Then we have here a gateway where we wait forever, potentially, because this is waiting for two tokens. One has already come through the happy path, no problem. But this one here can't be triggered for a number of reasons. The first thing I want to point out is that this model is a lie. It's got a very sneaky lie in there, and that lie is hidden here.
I
And you'll
can
probably
see
see
it
it if I
already.
move this task. This task is actually connected to this by this dotted line. So let's remove this thing. This is actually connected to this by this task here. So this is kind of fun. So let's talk through this again. The compensation cannot have two tasks run one after another. The weird rule of compensation, if I delete this for a moment, is that you can run this one task and then you can't connect it to another task. And what I think, and Thomas, you can let me know if this is correct, what I think the person who built this was trying to say was that they have this super cool compensation and they want their process to continue after the compensation has run, right? I think,
Mm-hmm.
without really
Let's see.
triggering it somewhere. So,
But wait, that
what
would
do you think?
mean they always want to compensate N1, or
That is weird.
because otherwise they can't complete the parallel gateway in the end.
Yeah, true. That is kind of weird. So maybe they don't. Maybe they just don't know they don't need this. But let's address the other problem they clearly have, which is they want to. This is a great problem to discuss. Actually, we have two tasks that we need to run that compensate this, which is not a crazy thing, right? That is not a weird thing to think. It's super common that it requires more than one task to run, but because the rules of BPMN, we're not allowed connect this to this, right? We're only allowed by the rules of BPMN to have a single task that is triggered by a compensation. But there is a cheat. Do you know the cheat?
I would go for a call activity there.
Even better. Even better. It is we can turn this into an expanded
Oh, okay,
subprocess.
yeah. Yeah.
Because the call activity would require us to create a whole other model. But
But
this thing
basically, it's
instead,
almost the same, right?
yeah, exactly, yeah. So what you can do is you can still have a compensation, but you can run multiple tasks inside uh, a call activity. So this would be B1. This is say, or BQ, whatever that is, B1 and B2. So this actually works. This would actually be fine. So now you can run both. And one of the issues is I don't think they realize that the process itself can handle the finishing the process. It doesn't need to go back here. And the final thing I want to do is this thing here. Now, this is a guess, Thomas, and you can tell me what you think. I think that that depending on the result of N3, that they need to compensate or not.
Yep. Yep.
And that's
Yep.
clearly not what's happening here.
Yeah. So my assumption was they have tried automating this and they've noticed that they cannot move over the parallel gateway and therefore split up in a parallel fashion before to end the process somehow, but not really, but somehow.
Exactly.
Or,
So here's what I would suggest. I'm going to, as a final solution for this, I'm going to have this thing here. Do you want to compensate? And the thing is, they never had a way of executing this. So
yeah, that's true.
then we actually need to trigger the compensation. There we go.
Better.
So now what will happen is we start our process, we arrive here. Nothing happens, very important, nothing ever happens to this event while we're on this task. We must complete it. Then we complete this, we complete this, we complete this. It should be 4, right? And then we arrive here and we decide whether we should compensate or not. If we don't, great, it ends. If we do run the compensation, the way compensation works is it'll check of the completed tasks, which one had this event, or one or more of these events, and it'll run this sub process. Once this end event is reached, the process ends.
Cool.
So that is my little solution to that previous one. I think that's basically what works. I think
it looks great. Very casual.
A lot of guesswork in there, but yeah.
Yeah. No, great. Appreciate it. Awesome. Having said though, I think we are done with our modeling session. Almost finishing at the mark of an hour. Oh, Talis commented. The gateway doesn't work as a wait state.
Yes, but the compensation event does, because the compensation event will actually wait there until the compensation is done. So it kind of works like a parallel gateway in the sense that it'll wait for those tasks to be completed before the token itself is continues. So the gateway isn't necessary anymore because we have the compensation throw.
Cool. Great answer. Awesome. With that, I think we can close things up. How was your beer, by the way? I haven't asked you. How's the
It's funny. I've very rarely had only one of these. So far, actually pretty okay. But I do like this beer. Actually, it's I would say it's not special in the sense that it's a pretty okay regular pills, I guess. Which is actually fine. That to me is a pretty. If you're going to have a beer that basically everyone's going to quite enjoy, but what I do have in the fridge is some BrewDog beer, which I shall have for later on because it's a lovely day outside. I might have a wee sit outside and have my BrewDog beer and enjoy.
You should do so.
Yeah. As a tip actually about your beer, one thing I was going to. Yeah, which is that. Wow, you've really powered through that. So I have a friend of mine who is vegetarian, And the smoky beer to him tastes like bacon, and he's a guy who has not had bacon in like 15 years, and he drinks this beer to try and remember the taste of bacon as he remembers it, which I think is an interesting reason to be drinking smoked beer. But ignore the vegetarians out there who
I
miss the taste of smoked bacon. This beer will help you remember. Um,
I
if that
wouldn't agree, but okay.
I
um,
think it's maybe not. Maybe for someone who hasn't had bacon in
yeah,
like 10
yeah,
years,
I think that's true.
maybe it tastes
You
like
need
bacon to
some
them.
of imagination to really. There is a similarity, but you need this kind of imagination to make this as fit. But it's good. It's pretty good. I can drink some if your friend needs some. I don't know whether it's actually available in Berlin, but for
Yeah,
Kommundacon, of course, I will be also showing up there. So
looking forward.
me too. Awesome. I think let's end it because the weather in Augsburg is also nice and I want to enjoy my evening as well. So thanks for being here and for joining this session with me. And if there's someone from those people still listening, if you want, feel free to reach out to me because we also try to do this session with other people, not always Niall and myself.
Hey, what's wrong with me?
Trying to get
What do
rid
I
of
do to
you.
get rejected from the?
Oh,
We should also mention that people should submit their models.
yeah, please do
Uh,
so.
we have a lot of very bad models, obviously, and not very bad, but ones that don't focus on best practices. But if you have a specific like model that already exists that you want a feature you would like us to add to it, this is something we're really interested in doing as well. So yeah, I think that's a
Indeed.
good idea. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Great. Thanks again. And now I'm moving to one last slide. So Niall wave because now you won't be visible
Bye,
anymore.
everybody. Thanks.
And now I quickly just wanted to talk to you about some new streams coming up because we decided to focus more on Twitch from a developer advocacy point of view. So next week at the same time and date or day, there will be a champion check-in where Luca will be explaining all about the champion program. So for some of you, this might be interesting, and maybe there's also a champion or two chiming in and chat about it. And of course, we have also another lovely Devril folk joining, Christina, who is going to talk about the Writing Center, or no, Writing Center of Excellence. I might have messed up some things on the slide here. And last but not least, there will also be a forum and community newsradar, community hub newsradar from Mia. So some new things coming up. So stick around, subscribe to the channel. And having said so, we are good to go. Have a nice day. Thanks for tuning in and see you next week.